The World Chalice Games are underway when suddenly a cyber and physical attack hits Data Center Alley in Northern Virginia, knocking out plant operations, disrupting gas pipelines, and flooding social media with rumors and disinformation. Even cooling systems at a major data center begin to fail under a heat dome, straining the grid further. Fortunately, this scenario wasn't real, but in November, EPSA members gathered in Houston to walk through this exact scenario during a new custom grid security exercise, testing how an event like this could affect the electric grid and your access to electricity, with a focus on dynamics specific to independent power providers. GridX is a national security drill for utilities and power providers hosted every 2 years by the North American Electric Reliability Corporation's Electric Information Sharing and Analysis Center, or E-ISAC. With more than 370 organizations participating in the 8th national drill, also held this November, it's a great example of how hands-on preparation can make a real-world difference. As cyber and physical attacks are becoming more sophisticated and harder to see coming, keeping the grid secure has never been more important. You're listening to Energy Solutions, a podcast from the Electric Power Supply Association, where we unpack the stories and trends behind America's power grid. I'm your host, Todd Snitchler, President and CEO of EPSA. Today we're diving into grid security with Michael Ball, CEO of the E-ISAC. In addition to hosting GridX, the E-ISAC is responsible for sharing critical threat information and helping keep the bulk power system resilient and stay ahead of emerging risks. In this episode, we unpack how the threat landscape is changing, what worries security experts most right now, how AI is accelerating and reshaping attacks, and why collaboration across companies and sectors matters more than ever. We also talk about GridX and how companies of all sizes can use the new GridX in a box format. Here's Michael. Well, Michael, thanks so much for taking time to be with us today and to have this conversation. You're responsible for some pretty important work that I think many in the industry know about, but I'm not sure people outside of the industry may be aware of. So let's start with the big picture. How would you look at, or how would you describe the current security landscape as you see it as it concerns the energy sector? And I'll throw a second question on there and let you kind of take it where you want. But what threats do you think are most top of mind right now? And I asked this as we've just come off the GridX exercise, and all kinds of great things were done there, and certainly appreciate the work that you did. And we'll talk about that in a little bit. But I think at the high level, it'd be good for people to have some level setting about what our security concerns are and what your posture is and how we're thinking about these challenges.
Yeah, I think I would just start from the perspective, let's just, honing in on cybersecurity. Essentially, that has become a ubiquitous threat for any business, any entity, any individual that is connected to the internet. I think that is the way of the world today, and you have to understand that and recognize there are threats associated with that. And so I think that starts the broad spectrum view. And I think drilling into our industry, though, recognizing that all of the industry businesses are subject to the typical cybersecurity threats. Folks are trying to get into networks. I can say from my past life, just in the scale of it, we were tracking the number of blocked attempts to connect to networks. And we would see up to 6.5 billion attempts a day that were blocked, just to give you scale, right? So it's really scary world out there. It is. Yeah. And that is actually consistent with any business. Again, just if you're connected to the internet, that is where the threats are at. Now, so our utilities and energy companies face these types of threats, just even as part of the normal operating business efforts to try to get into accounts payable fraud, trying to trick people into paying money. That is a really common issue. Other things that are really consistent are trying to take advantage of HR fraud and try to get access to payroll and benefits like that. But I think from our industry perspective, what makes it even more concerning is that if adversaries are able to get into those corporate networks, they can actually work to move laterally and attempt to get into the crown jewels as control networks. Yeah. And so that is concerning. And it shifts into that second question, what's top of mind. Adversaries that are trying to get into those environments for other reasons. Some of them are extraordinarily advanced. The other aspect of our business, our industry, is also just on the physical side. And we have assets in the field. A lot of them are very remote areas and very hard to necessarily protect. So we see a lot of things like just vandalism and copper theft that start to create a lot of public safety issues. A lot of taking copper out of an alive and active substation creates a pretty significant threat to the public. So we see a lot of that, not to mention outages that can come from that. As well as we see activity around drones that are very hard to deal with in today's environment. And the protections and the laws and the ability to respond is a significant challenge. So we see that out there. And then the stuff that really keeps me up at night is the ability to impact these assets from groups that are very motivated to make some sort of a statement, to express an ideology in a way that's very meaningful. And that is domestic violent extremists or other, even individuals that just have strong beliefs that they can make an impact. So I worry about this because that's something that catches like a snowball. It collects more and more interest. And the more you do it, the more folks find ways to deal with that. So those are the kinds of things that worry me. So again, the big picture is we're all subject to cyber attacks. Physical attacks really are part of industry, and it's certainly the things that are very industry impacting and grid impacting are of significant concern.
Yeah, this reminds me, I should have given our disclaimer about the seriousness of the topic. If you are concerned about security-related issues, this is not going to make you feel any better about things, but I think it's important that we discuss the reality of the world in which we operate. So we certainly appreciate that perspective. And you mentioned a couple of different ways that the grid is increasingly under threat or is under increasing threat. We hear that often. We see it in reporting about what's happening. From your perspective, what trends or threats? You've mentioned a couple, but what are the most important things that are maybe cutting edge for industry and honestly the public to understand? Some of the public has read about some of the incidents about shooting up substations and the situation in California now more than a decade ago, which was kind of the first real infrastructure attack that raised everyone's eyebrows. But as you noted, the world's evolving. And are there things that we should be paying closer attention to, or things that are keeping you up at night that are the things that will be keeping us up at night?
Yeah, you bet. And one of the things that I think is really a very common concern is artificial intelligence. And we see AI-enabled adversaries being able to optimize their abilities to launch attacks. And it comes in a wide variety of techniques. But we just see that threat growing more and more every day. And it wasn't too terribly long ago that you would see a phishing campaign. You could see the spelling errors. Well, now we're seeing very sophisticated social engineering phishing attacks. They're based on a gathering of information about their intended target, maybe even getting access to emails or messages that start to have references that are very real. And it is very hard to detect that. And then we are seeing now reports of almost autonomous attacks using AI engines that require very little human interaction. So the scale and the speed in which that can happen is probably one of the biggest concerns that I would see, and something top of mind there. I would say even more specific to our industry, I think the knowledge and awareness of industrial control systems and there are toolkits that are modular now. They're designed to attack or get access to and actually be very covert in operating in industrial control systems. These are in the hands of very advanced threat actors. And certainly we see these tools evolving. So that capability and the access to that is also very concerning. So it makes it much easier for much more sophisticated attacks to be conducted. So,
yeah, it's not the quote unquote good old days where it was the teenager in their basement that was trying to see if they could just to prove that they could. It's a whole different level of interaction, which I know we're going to talk about some more. So where do you think industry has made the most progress in recent years? I mean, everyone is trying to have shields up, as it's often referred to, as we see situations evolving globally. But what have we done as an industry sector, in your view, with relation to cyber physical security? And what are the successes and what are the things that you think we're still working on that are trending in a good direction, but clearly we've got things that we are going to have to continue to improve on?
Well, certainly it's a great question and a pretty deep topic, but I think the point is that I am seeing some really significant improvements in the awareness. I think there was a reference to going back to years ago when we couldn't worry about just these teenagers trying to get into environments. What we're seeing now, though, is the reporting and the threat reports and the things we hear about like Volt Typhoon and geopolitical landscape that's, creates a lot of anxiety for us. I think what we're seeing is this increased awareness that these threats exist. And coming through a journey of many years where that awakening occurs within an organization, I think there's no doubt and no debate that our industry is a target, and we have to be prepared. So I think that's one key area. The information sharing too is so key,
Yeah.
and I can't underscore that enough. And it's not just information sharing between the private sector and the government sector, those of us that work in between, but it's cross sector and thinking bigger than outside, than within the silo of our industry. We have a lot of adjacent critical infrastructure that we depend on: natural gas, telecommunications. All of these are part of the puzzle that needs to be put together and understood more effectively. It is these areas that we've seen great progress in. It is also these areas that I think we have some tremendous opportunities to improve in. So I think that's where we need to really focus, is working across these sectors and thinking more holistically as a way.
Yeah, this is not a landscape we want to be siloed in, right? I mean, that leads to worse outcomes than if we're cooperating as much as possible.
Absolutely, absolutely. I cannot underscore that enough.
Excellent. So for those that are less experienced in the security sector, why don't you try to explain for folks what the E-ISAC is? Because what we've been talking about the last couple of minutes is exactly the information sharing that happens on that platform. But some folks may not have had exposure to it or have had minimal exposure to it. And I have found it to be incredibly helpful to have a better line of sight about what is happening, not just in one region or another, but what is happening nationally in a way that you can start to see trends or see themes repeating. So talk a little bit about what the E-ISAC is and how it functions and what you see the value proposition is. Because whatever you're about to say, I'm going to agree with it, because I think it is a tremendous resource and we lean on it every day.
I sincerely appreciate that, Todd. And I think the best way for me to think about the ISAC is to actually step back and recognize that there are information sharing and analysis centers, so that's the ISACs, across multiple industries that are throughout the country and even internationally. Mm-hmm. So the construct of ISACs are built on serving an industry, a specific segment, and being able to share that actionable information out to its members. And so I think that's an important baseline to understand. How we do that and our scale and our capabilities all depend on how those are led and how they're supported and how the engagement occurs. I have to say, it's an amazing organization. And it is actually the one thing that brought me from my prior role. It's the mission. And it's a very broad mission to reduce cyber physical security risk to the bulk power system, but it carries well beyond that as well and across industry. And it's really about raising shared situational awareness, supporting coordinated response, and strengthening that sector resilience by the products and information we share. And it's multi-directional. It's not just one way. In fact, in many ways, we start to become aware of situations where we may see an incident in one location or in a region, and we start to be able to analyze that and provide, hey, here's something happening, here's some indicators of what you need to be looking for, and get that out to all of industry. That is really where we serve an important role. We have nearly 2,000 organizations that are part of E-ISAC. 80% of that are utility members across the US and Canada. That's a really important part of it. This role, the function we serve, it is without the boundaries. It serves all of North America.
Right.
And so that 80% are these organizations. The other 20% are partners from across government and other sectors and vendors serving the industry. So we try to, again, knit together across multiple functions, but that membership is so essential. It is a division of NERC. So E-ISAC is a division of NERC, and that's a federally designated electric reliability organization. Yep. NERC sets standards and regulations. And the E-ISAC conversely focuses on this involuntary information sharing. So the kind of non-regulatory side, not of this work, but we work very well together. And we provide really a trusted sector-wide visibility. That's really what it's about. And it's not only just with our industry, but it's with our government partners. And that is really important part of what we do. I think of us as we are the conduits of information that help all entities be more resilient and informed. And that's really an important part of the ISAC role.
And you've already got some really significant engagement, as you noted, across the footprint. But I guess if there were a couple of things that you could maybe encourage or emphasize? What are some ways that entities that should be or are already involved can be more engaged or more involved? I know there are multiple avenues, and some organizations really lean in, others are participating, but maybe not as active. But I think you've hit on one of the things that really had a light shined on it this past week at the GridX exercise, which is the information sharing piece. And so, how do you think about organizations getting more involved and doing so in a meaningful way? We all have plenty of data that we get. We all have too many emails, but when the emails come in through the E-ISAC and there's information there that's usable, I think that's particularly helpful. And you've already noted that oftentimes comes in from third parties and then it's distributed across the membership. So what are ways that maybe a nominally engaged member or somebody who's not fully engaged should be thinking about greater levels of engagement to improve both the value to them, but also to the E-ISAC and to the other members?
That's a great question. And that level of engagement is something we want to continue to foster. It is not just a one-way or unidirectional information sharing. I think of the ISAC as a library of resources. And that library of resources is actually enriched off information that's shared with the ISAC.
Yeah.
I'll give you a great example. When I first came in and I was listening to some of the achievements, there was an entity that was sharing information kind of in a bulk scale about physical security and copper theft incidents. So this was, it's really common issue. Well, by providing information and incidents as they occurred across the organization, our analytics team was able to come together and produce a product that was shared back to the industry to help identify areas where investments could be made in more focused and targeted ways. And by doing that member company was able to make some of those investments and saw a 40% reduction in copper theft. That is real, tangible, actionable information. And it illustrates the spirit of what the ISAC is about. And so by engaging, sharing information and being able to receive information and taking action on it, that is really vital. And we want to do that more and more. And I think when we do that, we also earn trust and confidence because we 100%. Want to be the trusted source for actionable information for our industry. So that's a really key example.
That's a great example, real world dollars and cents, but also system reliability related issues. It covers all the things that many of the entities should be caring about.
Yep. And that just illustrates the value of that partnership. There are a number of ways to engage with us. We have a portal that folks have access to. We've invested in making that portal much more easy to use. We receive fabulous feedback on the ability to navigate from prior experiences. So being able to make it easier to navigate, get information you need, having sections where there's that library, sources of reference material. I can tell you, even in my past role, I didn't really realize the depth of information was accessible to me. And so I wish I would have taken more advantage of it.
Sure.
Where I could take this, because as a chief security officer of an organization, you want to be able to provide information that's based on industry. And this information is really a great resource for our industry. So interacting with the portal, engaging with us through workshops, webinars. We have an annual conference, GridSecCon, that's every year. And of course, as you mentioned, our biannual exercise, GridX.
So before we talk about GridX, let me ask you one last question about the E-ISAC. So what is the E-ISAC's role, or how is it engaged when a member is dealing with a threat or there's an active crisis? What is the specific responsibility? And then what are some of the other things that maybe go on in the background that aren't as readily apparent to a third party who may not be aware?
Well, I think one of the first things during a crisis to know is to know your role. The ISAC is not there to direct operations or incident response of an entity. That is really, that is an important function of the entities that are actually experiencing the incident. Our role is to actually be available and accessible to be able to provide information that can be helpful during that incident. So we want to make sure that it's a resource as needed, when needed by an entity that's responding. I think it's very important that, again, going back to the value of incidents, if they're happening in one area, that doesn't mean that it's just isolated. In fact, it may be the precursor of additional activities are happening. So our situational awareness, we are a curator of that information, and we can get that back out to industry so that we can help reduce that risk of an event happening elsewhere as well. So that's really vital part of our role and how I see us operating.
Yeah, I think I heard someone say recently that oversharing is better than undersharing because that's sometimes where the noise gets filtered out and then it becomes more actionable intelligence instead of just an, I don't know what's happening here. So let's talk about the topic du jour, at least if you're in my seat. I got to participate in my first tabletop exercise as part of the GridX exercise last week. Thank you for hosting what was an outstanding event. The people around the table, I think, certainly at the event that I was at, were very engaged. A great exercise that really, I think, shined a light on some questions that need to be addressed, was really helpful in identifying ways that there have been successes already. But I don't want to steal all your thunder, so I'll throw it out to you and say this was GridX 8, correct? Was the most recent one. And as you said, they're every other year. So we've been doing them for a while now. But can you explain to people that have not participated in a GridX what it is and why does it matter to the industry? I mean, it's obvious if you've done the exercise, but maybe if you haven't yet participated and you hear about it, what is it and why should it matter?
Thank you, because I think this is really a hallmark of our industry. I think it's exceptional. If you look across different industries, this becomes the electricity industry's largest and most comprehensive security exercise, again, every other year. But it brings together thousands of participants. Even in the prior one, we had well over 15,000. I think we're going to see a number closer to 20,000 different participants.
Well, that's outstanding.
Across North America, and with both the US and Canadian participants. It includes utilities, RTOs, ISOs, our government agencies, law enforcement, emergency management, vendors. It starts to bring the ecosystem together. Mm-hmm. And it's really designed to test how the North American grid would really respond to a coordinated cyber and physical attack, extreme events, things that we hope never, ever come to bear. But it's also one of the great opportunities to really explore the possible. And, it's really broken up into a couple different elements. One is a 2-day distributed play scenario where utilities and partners, they run through those scenarios in their own facilities and using their own incident response plans, basically using the scenario as a way to engage their leadership and including the region and the state and local government. I want to encourage that. How would that entity respond under that scenario? So the framework is delivered, but individual execution is done locally. And I think that's a really great opportunity to explore things like incident management systems, kind of leader stress tests, and what kind of strategic decisions need to be made in extreme scenarios or a very degraded grid environment. I think that is really key. And it kind of plays towards some of the bigger risks that we worry about today. There's also an executive tabletop where we bring together our government partners and some CEOs from utilities forum along to really explore what are some of the dynamic issues at a very national level, cross-sector level, because we're having natural gas, have telecommunications, we have other sectors part of that. And that becomes a really valuable time to explore that national response and policy level decision-making that needs to happen during something that would be attacks on our homeland. So definitely another exercise that is done in a very focused and very managed environment.
Yeah, and it was extremely well done. I can't speak highly enough about the experience that I had through it. As you've now had a few days to think about it, I'm sure your team's going to do a full debrief, but as you got some time to reflect on it, were there any major takeaways from this year's exercise, or was there anything that surprised you or maybe stood out as a aha moment or the opposite of aha moment? Was there anything that surprised you in a negative way?
I have to say, I never look at the findings out of an exercise as a negative thing, outside of just definitely a call to action work to do. But I would say I would characterize 3 core areas where I saw the kind of lessons play out. Number one was, especially when you're looking at national level priorities, when you see attacks at a national level, you start worrying about national priorities and security. Right. And so if you see, especially in the cyber attacks that are happening, and if it's having wide scale impacts to the bulk electric system, we're seeing a degraded state of the grid. There is absolute concern from a national perspective, both in Canada and US, about where the priorities need to be. But I would say that the reality is when a cyber attack impacts an energy company that's delivering power to its community, it is the community that's impacted. Is the state and local communities that need to deal with the consequences of outages. If you look at the state construct in the United States, the governors and the state emergency operations centers would be worried about a lot of key issues the where the electricity needs are most important. The reality is those may not be the same priorities at a national.
That's right.
So there is a dialogue that needs to continue to happen about if there is a prioritization of an energy company on something of national security importance as a priority over a community, there has to be some dialogue and even understanding, because in our industry, when everything's all said and done, it could be look at the wildfires or look at other things, the lawsuits start to pile up afterwards. So that is a reality of something like this. And so the better understanding of how that would work is something that is a call to action for our government partners. It's not new, but I think it was particularly poignant when we started to discuss some of the disparity between those priorities.
Yeah.
So that's number one. Number two is really coordination and communication. That is no surprise. If you were to go to any exercise, you start stripping away communications, things start to really to break. And in GridX 7, that was 2 years ago, one of the action items was to start to define a resilient communications guide, a strategy, which was deliberate. And it basically provided some context around don't put all your eggs in a basket in communication, using techniques like what military and the industry knows this pretty well, but is PACE, which is PACE, and primary, alternate, contingent, and emergency, having different communication strategies. Well, it's a guide that was provided. What became quite evident in this exercise is that there's going to be value of taking the next step. And that next step is what does the operating model look like? Not only just within our industry, and you got the Electricity Subsector Coordinating Council, which plays a big role, our government partners and ability to communicate and coordinate, with Department of Energy, and then add to it other sectors like natural gas, which is such an important and vital partner to it.
Yeah.
How do we interact? So creating a communications framework around that. So it's like the next step. That's going to be important. The third one is really something we've already talked about a little bit, but which is intelligence and information sharing. Yeah. We just have to improve it. We need to grow our engagement. We need to continue to do a better job of drawing in folks that can effectively engage, work across our silos, making sure that we are sharing it and at a speed that keeps up with the worries that we had when I mentioned AI. It moves fast. And so we have to move fast as well.
Yeah, it's funny you say that. I didn't hear the phrase timely this go around. I think that message has been soundly hammered into people's heads. So I think we've all caught on to that one. So this year, EPSA took advantage of the GridX in a box opportunity that the E-ISAC provides. And we customized a drill for our member companies. And we had a significant increase in member company participation. And we certainly are grateful to the E-ISAC for your help in doing that. So can you talk to us about why the E-ISAC decided to introduce this new resource, and how does it build on the national event that you talked about a minute ago?
Yeah, that's a great question, Todd. Thank you, because I was really excited to come into this organization and see how far they've come to make the GridX exercise planning accessible to all kinds of members. And GridX has been built where often it thrived in large organizations, big IOUs that were able to have teams and dedicated experts, and they could put together comprehensive and elaborate exercises. But it became harder for utilities, especially medium and small. And so this actually became a bit of a call to action that came out of prior exercise too. What can we do to make it a little bit easier for all organizations, all sizes to participate in this amazing exercise? So this flexible, scalable model really enables utilities to really run the set of scenarios, not only during GridX, but anytime. And because we don't want to wait every other year to do exercise. So we want to build modular capable that can be as small or as sophisticated as you want. But I think that was a real connector to those that were just trying to get started. We even have a module for tabletops where we can deliver an exercise to you. It's pretty well baked, and you can spin up a drill and an exercise in a day. So I think that's pretty exciting to see that. So I'm so glad you were using it. We're going to continue to receive feedback. Certainly you're very appreciative of anything you have through your experience with it.
Sure.
Because we're going to continue to just improve on that and make that more accessible, because that is the key. We need that industry that is capable, resilient, and you do that by exercising and making exercises a little more accessible. That's our mission.
Yeah, the time to figure out your plan is not in the middle of a crisis. And these practice exercises are a great way to help expose maybe some weaknesses, but also to solidify that the plan that's in place actually functions. And so we certainly were grateful for the opportunity. So, Michael, you came to this role as CEO at an important time around grid security. I mean, the world is changing. There's conflicts that didn't exist several years ago. There are all kinds of things that we read about in the paper every day that create challenges for virtually every industry, but ours, I think, is at the top of that pile as well. As you look at your role as CEO, what have been and what are your priorities for the E-ISAC? Are there things that you've said, look, we're building on, and Manny Cancel did a terrific job before you, and so I know that you had a great organization to start with, but as the world's evolved, clearly you must have some priorities that are also important things that you're focused on now that you've taken the helm at the organization. Can you talk about what some of those are and kind of how you think we're tracking in achieving some of those outcomes that you want to see?
Yeah, I have to say, I couldn't be more fortunate to be able to step into an organization that has come so far. There is just tremendous talent and resources within this organization. So it's a beautiful place to start when you're not starting from the beginning. I kind of look at it as I now have the baton. And the thing that I see is building off the great work that's already there. I mean, we just talked about some amazing tools we have. But I think I'd say my biggest priority now going forward is driving towards a state of readiness. And what I mean by that is we explored in GridX, and we have had to explore scenarios that are devastating. We take it to an extreme because we want to understand how do we operate in extreme. Well, we also need to make sure that we have that readiness to operate that way in a very significant incident, in a way that challenges the assumptions we oftentimes make. So when we talk about communications, how do I operate? How do we provide tools and information to an industry that may actually be suffering communication failures? They may not be able to get to a web portal. How do we, as the ISAC, operate 24/7 and for extended periods of time in a crisis state? So we're going to continue to build on the great capabilities that are now, but be able to drive it to the next level. And that's where I see it. So it's not necessarily mixing with the secret sauce that's already here. It's just making it better and more ready. We do this every day. When we get a little information about a threat that's emerging, we get it out to our industry, and they have an opportunity to read that, react to it, mitigate a risk, identify it. That's a small muscle memory exercise we do every day. Now we just need, and the GridX helps us to explore it in a much more significant way. So we need to be ready, and so does our industry.
Yeah, I think that is fantastic advice. So for any company that may be listening or anybody that's kind of trying to figure out how they might interact with the E-ISAC, what are some actionable steps that you think could be taken to strengthen security and better connect with the resources that you already provide? Because there's a lot available. So what are the best ways for people to engage and interact and get the value out of the resources that you provide?
I think first and foremost, if you're not a member of the ISAC, just hurry up and get out here. We'd love to have you participate in it, because that's probably the first thing. If you don't have access, you don't have portal accounts, you're not taking advantage of resources that are already available to you as a member, where you can spend a lot of money going out to third parties to get certain types of threat feeds and things like this. But this is a community. So by participating and getting signed up and getting accounts, you can get to see the rich environment. And frankly, even from my perspective, if you are a member, be an active member, get involved. And, when I saw some of the stuff that my team had access to, I was really blown away and really impressed. I had a lot of resources, we had a lot of information, but the amount of information concentrated, available within the ISAC, looking through the portal and the documents, participating in more webinars, and even being able to be available on an all points bulletin. If something significant's coming out, you're right on the front lines of hearing about actionable information. So that's just about engagement. If you're not engaged, sign up. If you are engaged, engage more. And because I think you will get as much as you put into it.
Yeah.
And I see that from this side of the fence, and it's amazing.
Yeah, I think that's great counsel. As we bring our conversation to a close, I'll have one last question for you. And it may be the $64,000 question. I don't know. You'll have to help me decide whether it is or not. But is there anything that you want industry to have top of mind as we head into 2026? The threat landscape is always changing. There's challenges every day. But are there things that you're looking at 2026 over the horizon that you say, these are the things that I'm paying more attention to, or these are the things that I think we need to focus on?
I'll just try to touch a couple of them because there's plenty that I'm worried about.
Yeah,
But
I'm sure there are.
But I think that the really key thing is just to recognize that the threat landscape is no longer abstract. We're seeing it's operational. We need to integrate. All you got to do is look at the news and see the geopolitical threat space that we are dealing with today. And we need to build into a better understanding of risks and risk intelligence. And so that's going to be a real key thing. I think, again, that the world landscape is pretty significant. It's really important to really focus on, even as you strengthen your own, our utilities strengthen their security posture, apply great hygiene. You still have adjacent risks. Supply chain security is probably one of the bigger ones. Vendors create pathways into your environment. Vendor relationships are trusted relationships, and so you got to kind of actually trust but verify. And really not just for connectivity into your networks, but the products and service you receive. Are you even specific about what security requirements you have? If you don't have that, make sure you do that. The other part is just that readiness message that I can't foot stomp enough here, which is just revisit incident response playbooks. We want to keep them updated. Make sure you got that reflexive capability to spin up ability to respond in a crisis. Frankly, our industry is excellent at this. Storm outages and major outages, there is a framework, and just utilize that. Make sure you understand and are ready for that. That's going to be some of my top 5 2026 objectives, is really enforcing those and messaging on that.
Michael, I think that's a terrific message for us to close with. We certainly are grateful that you took time to visit with us. We hope that you get a lot out of the GridX feedback. We're all ears for the report when it comes out here in a couple of months. And we certainly thank you for your time today. It's been a great conversation.
Thank you, Todd. I appreciate it. Appreciate the opportunity to visit with you. And thanks again for the time as well.
Keeping the grid secure is a team effort, and it's clear from our conversation today that our industry is stronger when we stay connected, share information, and prepare together. The World Chalice Games might not be real, but as Michael said, these threats aren't theoretical. They're real and evolving, and they require every sector to stay ready, practice their plans, and lean on the resources available to them. Tools like GridX help companies stress test their systems and respond with confidence if something goes wrong. At EPSA, we'll continue helping our members practice and prepare for times of crisis, so consumers can count on reliable power even when challenges arise. Thanks for listening. You can learn more about these issues on our website at epsa.org and follow us on social media on X at EPSA News and on LinkedIn. The music for this podcast is produced by Let Me Hold That Ltd. Be sure to subscribe and join us next time on Energy Solutions.
Energy Solutions is brought to you by the Electric Power Supply Association. EPSA represents America's competitive power suppliers, bringing about 200,000 megawatts of power generation resources to customers throughout the United States. The music in this episode is written, produced, and performed by Let Me Hold That Ltd. Discover the power of competition at www.epsa.org.